কলকাতা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে একটা রুমার আছে, কেউ তার ছবি অটোমেটিক্যালি স্টাফ রুমে চলে আসে।
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome our esteemed guest, Professor Omlan Dashgupta, the faculty of the Department of English and Culture Studies, the research scholars, and our dear students to this lecture series organized under UGC DRS-II SAP-III. I would like to request our faculty members to begin the program by lighting the lamp. I would also request our esteemed guests to light the lamp.
Please take the picture. আমেরিকানের আলো দেখবে
Mountain studies.
Mountain studies and which is the direction to and Omlanda, we have always said that there should be 4 towers, of which one is Shukantan Shukriya, and the 2 smaller towers would be Omlan and Shapunda. No, but I want to, pay my deepest respects, despite all this chit-chat, that I remember Professor Shapun Dashgupta in Shapun Chakraborty with deepest reverence and with a lot of sadness. And I wish he was here with Omlanda. I've always seen these two as, leading lights who were there for us. So thank you, Omlanda, and I hope he's there.
Yes, thank you very much.
I would like to ask Riyadi to come and felicitate our esteemed guest. I would ask Professor Nalini Bhattacharya. I'll ask, ma'am, you should come first and welcome.
Yes. I've already said my little bit. I just wanted to dedicate this today's lecture to Shapun Chakraborty, who is my Dada and my Guru, and to Amlanda, who is here, and I hope he is here with Shapunda, and we are all very beholden that he has come. And this is the first of our phase 3 DRS visiting fellow lectures, and due to various constraints, mainly money, we have been just able to sort of keep our heads above the water, and I declare this session open. I now invite Professor Angshuman Por to give a 5-minute talk about what we have done, and then of course we Amlanda speaks.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Nandini. We are really happy that today we have with us Amlanda, and we are grateful to him. Just 10 days back, when I called him up and requested him to deliver this talk, immediately he agreed to a proposal. We are so grateful to him. And yes, Nandini was talking about Professor Shapon Chakraborty. He was also, I hope that some of you know that he was the supervisor of Shubhajit. He did his PhD with him, and he has been my teacher as well in a way. And আমার সঙ্গে ওর বাংলা নিয়ে প্রচুর কথা হবে ইংরেজির বাইরে। আমি এবং নন্দিনীদি নানা দায়িত্বে থাকার সময় আমরা অনেকবার ওকে এখানে পেয়েছি এবং উনিও আসতেন। সত্যি it's very good that Nandini has decided to dedicate this talk to Professor Shapon Chakraborty. And now just a few words about the project that we are working on. It's the second phase, as you can see, that DRS-II, SAP DRS-II. It began when Professor Dept Bandyopadhyay, who is now the Vice Chancellor of Bankura University, he was the coordinator of this program, and at the time we started working on this, and after 5 years there came a time when we thought that we won't be able to have the second phase of the program, and it was Professor Bhattacharya, Nandini, who actually in a way I should say that pushed us to have this, and we too went to Delhi to defend almost what thought to be a kind of a dead program, but it was revived, and the credit should be given to Professor Nandini Bhattacharya, and it was revived in 2018, and this is, as you can see, that this is the third year of this second phase works that we are doing. And this time, Nandini has already pointed out that we have received, a meager sum of money, and it's a big constraint under which we are working. And this is the first lecture that we are organizing. Amlanda, the title of our project is Ethics of Border Making, and we are actually, inquiring the history of partition of the subcontinent. And in the first 3 years, we have organized an exhibition, so many seminars and conferences as well. One of those seminars was on border crossing also. One was on Chor. So many things we have done, and a translation workshop we have also organized, in which we translated some of the partition narratives into English, and this book will come out this year soon. And another book Nandini is editing that will also come out this year. So we are working very hard, and the exhibition, the border exhibition that we organized, that also received very well response. It was widely covered by the newspapers, by the media, and I should also like to thank the university authorities for giving us support. And this year, another thing that I should point out, that as a part of this program, though it's not related directly to the area in which we are working, but we are actually organizing talks which could be of some use to our scholars and students. And as a part of this, we have invited you to talk on King Lear. So this is, to put in a very succinct way or brief way whatever we have done and whatever we are planning to do. And under the able leadership of Nandini Bhattacharya, who is now the head also. So both the coordinator of the project and the head. We hope that in the coming 2 years we'll be able to complete this phase, and we'll be able to move on to the next phase of the SAP program. And we need your help. I sincerely mean it, the help of the students, the help of the research scholars, who have always been of much help to us, to the project. And we have also a small library which is full of books, good resources we have been able to somehow build up. And these are being used by the scholars as well. So many of our PhD scholars are also working in these areas. So that is also something which is important to us. So with these few words, once again, I really, thank you, Amlanda, for readily accepting our proposal and for coming here. We are really fortunate that we are having you today amongst us. So with these few words, I now request.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to request Professor Shubhajit Sengupta to come and say a few words and introduce our esteemed guest, Professor Amlanda. Sir? Professor Shubhajit Sengupta is also going to chair today's session. So I would like you all to please welcome him to the stage with an applause.
Thank you, Shaktapurni. And good afternoon, everyone. Amlanda, our other visitors from Kolkata, and my dear students and scholars. Professor Amlan Dasgupta is former professor of English, Jadavpur University. He is a noted scholar, not only of Renaissance literature, but also of classical and biblical studies. Besides, he is an authority on Milton. He was a student of Presidency College, years before Presidency became a university, during his undergraduate program, and went on to join the MA program at Jadavpur University. He later received an MPhil from Oxford University and came back to Jadavpur University for his PhD. He started teaching at Scottish Church College in Kolkata in 1982, and then moved on to Calcutta University before joining Jadavpur University. We were postgraduate students at Jadavpur University when Amlanda, for so he is to us, joined Jadavpur. But we, of our 2-year program, had only around 10 months of his classes, perhaps a little less, because for the major part of our MA program at Jadavpur University, Professor Dasgupta was teaching at the University of Calcutta. Professor Dasgupta taught courses ranging from classical and Arthurian studies to pre-modern and modern literature. He learned Latin and Greek from Raymond Pillet, Jesuit father of St. Xavier's College, Calcutta, and from Margaret MacGregor of Bishop's College, Calcutta. And he also gave lessons in these languages to interested students outside the university curriculum. Besides, Professor Dasgupta also built an archive of North Indian classical music at the School of Cultural Texts and Records at Jadavpur University, of which he became director in 2010. He has also offered courses on the history of North Indian classical music. His research interests are interesting and very varied, and they include classical European thought, the history of Christianity, Renaissance English literature, and the history of Indian music. Besides, Professor Dasgupta knows a number of languages, including Bengali, English, Hindi, Sanskrit, classical Greek, and Latin. He has authored several books, among which the major books are Jishu in Bengali, Khan Sahib Alladia Khan, My Life. It's a translation in English of Khan Sahib Alladia Khan's book. Alladia Khan, of course, was one of the most famous, one of the greatest of North Indian Hindustani classical vocal artists of the 20th century. Besides this, Professor Dasgupta has also authored a book called Renaissance Texts and Contexts. He has edited Measure for Measure and has also edited Aristotle's Poetics. So far as books on music are concerned, Professor Dasgupta has edited a book called Music and Modernity, North Indian Classical Music in an Age of Mechanical Reproduction. He has also translated a collection of short stories by Premendra Mitra called Mosquito and Other Stories. He has written a number of articles, and they are numerous, but I'll only talk about a few. One is on Samson Agonistus, called Samson's Shame, Modes of Self-Consciousness in Samson Agonistus, published in Essays and Studies, Jadavpur University. He has another article called Determined Things, Power and Comic Structure in Measure for Measure, another called The Home, the Nation, the World, and of course another titled Tragedy and the Good Life, published in Literature and Philosophy, Essay in Connections. That's the name of the book in which the essay was published. He has a number of essays on classical music as well, one of which is called Women and Music, the Case of North India, another called Musical Contests, Reflections on Musical Values in Popular Film, published in Journal of the Moving Image, Department of Film Studies, Jadavpur University. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Omlan Dasgupta, who is going to talk today to us about King Lear, and more specifically, as the banner there tells us, on the pursuit of happiness in King Lear, and this is a subject in which we should all be interested. Please join me, therefore, in welcoming Professor Omlan Dasgupta, to whom now I hand over the microphone and the session.
Thank you. I retired a couple of years ago. This is the first time I have come out of my house, as it were, to talk about literature, because this is an invitation from friends, and this is something that it cannot be denied. And so I have come and feel that I am among friends. That is very important. So I thank you once again, and I will speak about the pursuit of happiness and its relation to love. My dramatic example is King Lear, but there is a kind of conceptual frame. It is something I have been working on. Like all my projects, these are incomplete and fragmentary and desultory. But time to time, I've trying to chip away at this great block of European thought, which I find in European Greek ethical thought, and it also stems from my interest in the poetics as being foundationally, in my opinion, a text on tragedy and ethics. So this is some of the background, some of the concepts, therefore, are drawn from Greek ethical thought. The relevance of these concepts to modern philosophy is also well established, for instance, in the writings of Martha Nussbaum, for instance, or Bernard Williams, who have taken these ideas from Aristotle and from the Stoics and sort of reinterpreted them, as it were, reintroduced them in as ways of encountering or ways of interrogating other kinds of predicaments. That is the reason why I am emboldened to use these notions, not so much in terms of there is the kind of thing that we have all done when we were young, had to write essays on Macbeth, drawing upon Aristotle's theory of tragedy. We came to various calamitous ends. Nandini will remember that we did it with Professor Dasgupta, my teacher, my mentor. We did not do very well. So Nevertheless, it is Master Shai, as I call him, who has taught me to understand that there are issues which are larger philosophical issues in the poetics and in Greek thought, which are capable of being used in a more, as it were, in a more plastic manner and a more elucidatory manner. This is what I have been trying to do. I have a couple of small articles which I have given to Nandini, and Nandini will circulate them as she, if to anybody who might be interested. So one is in Bangla, published in Chaturanga, but they're not given there, so I was taking one in Chaturanga. Last issues of Chaturanga, which I was requested by the editor to contribute an essay. So this is called Tragedy and Philanthropia. Tragedy of Philanthropia. It was actually a lecture that I gave at Burdwan University for a colleague, a departed colleague, and that is something that I wrote up. An earlier essay which Shubhajit mentioned, which is Tragedy and the Good Life. But in both those, I concentrate mainly on Greek tragedy and Greek ethics. So I'm trying in this essay, and this is going to be an experiment perhaps, trying to take these ideas and see how they sit with Renaissance play. Shakespeare's King Lear. It's a play which is difficult for us, for historical reasons, to approach, because the teaching of King Lear in Kolkata particularly has been associated with a number of very eminent persons whose classes I attended, even though I was not a student at Calcutta University. I went to attend his classes, and I referred to Professor Jyoti Bhattacharya and Professor Kumar Dashgupta, and I had also the great privilege of studying this play with Mr. Giti Dutta. So this then becomes a kind of disincentive, because there is it gives a sense that it's, and in all their lectures in various ways, they have talked about the difficulty that lies at the heart of this way. More difficult perhaps than even other Shakespearean tragedies, something which is almost impenetrable. So so whatever, fools rush in, so on. But let's get on with it. So as I said, the subject of today's talk. So I'll try to plan this lecture in this way. I'll give a fairly short introduction over the next 15 minutes or so, and then on the conceptual frame. Then we'll look at the play, King Lear itself, and see some of these ideas perhaps in action. The subject of today's talk, in a general way, is tragedy and ethics. More particularly, the relationship between the actions of tragedy and the end of life conceived of in Greek ethics, which is described as a kind of excellence of living, a form of happiness. Happiness, I use. The word that the Greeks used to describe this state is eudaimonia. The word comes from the word daimon, which means a spirit, a tutelary spirit of some kind. So, and you is the same word as the Sanskrit su. So, eudaimonia is something like shobha. That's more or less how I translate this. So, eudaimonia, a concept used by Plato, by Aristotle, by Epicurus, by the Stoics. In Greek philosophy, the end of life is the pursuit of happiness, though it may appear that what the philosopher calls happiness is not quite what we might make. So what is it? What is this happiness? What is the good life? Plato never fully defines eudaimonia, but his assessments of how it is achieved apparently change from the early period to the middle period. This is again some great area of confusion which I entirely avoid. Basically you say that you can't say that Plato says this or Plato thinks this, because Plato thinks gives you many views on the same topic, for instance, and notably on whether poetry is any good or not. And famously he said that it isn't any good, it's very bad. But then also he said that no, it is something which comes from the gods. So we never know. Plato is again the most impenetrable of philosophers, and when you think that you've got a grasp on him, almost surely means you haven't. So that is why I say this is that, you know, when I say that this is what Plato is saying, I'm saying that these are some of the things that he appears to be saying in various places. So Plato sees the search for eudaimonia as being an unwavering struggle for the truth. Aletheia, the word that means the exercise of virtue and the quest for harmony and order in the soul. In a famous passage, he proclaims, I've given this to a handout, I don't know whether it was able to delayed it till the last moment, but there is a small passage number 1. So if you ever get hold of it, you can look it up. Passage number 1 is, there are numbered, but let's put numbers to the first paragraph. It's from Plato's Apology, the speech that he gave at his trial, defending himself from the charge of corrupting the youth of Athens. And it is here that he proclaims that the unexamined life is not worth living. And this is, I think that what this unwavering struggle against all adversities is what you might see as being the truly platonic understanding of what the philosopher stands for. And for Plato, therefore, philosophy is the only worthwhile activity, because it is philosophy which turns its face away from the world and withstands it, as it were, in its gaze on the truth. The philosopher's hero, I often think, is what we see in Plato. So, we won't stay with Plato for very long, we'll just go on to Aristotle. The quest for happiness may be thought to be fundamental to Aristotle's thought, and compared to his master Plato, he spells out what it involves and the means of attaining it fully. It forms the central issues of his very central body of writing on ethics. There are 3 works actually. One is called the Nicomachean Ethics, written for his son. There is the Eudemian Ethics, and there is something called the Magna Moralia, which is again very dicey text, which may be a relaxia. We don't really know, but there are three separate texts which do not agree entirely with each other. There is a lot of scholarly debate as to which is later, which is earlier, which is more fully final statement of views, and this is something that again we will entirely avoid. For practical purposes, we will follow the Nicomachean Ethics because that is the most easily available. That is available everywhere on the net. The good thing about doing the Greeks is that copyright doesn't affect you. All of the books are available, all the texts are available, all the good editions are available, because most of the good editions were made more than 50 years ago. So you go to archive.org, it's all there. So you just download them and read them, and particularly the texts in very top editions. Right. So we shall focus on the, as I said, on the Nicomachean Ethics, and just give me ability. So I have 3 passages from the Nicomachean Ethics in my handout, which I shall try to put. So, Aristotle meditates deeply on the relationship between happiness and chance. Eudaimonia can be thought of as good fortune, but of a special kind. We all know that our lives are constantly invaded by chance. The Greek word is tuke. Dike. Y comes from the way in which in Latin the Greek U was rendered as Y, but the Greek spelling is tuke, corresponding to TU, CH, kind, E. Okay. The long one. How then is one to seek or to hold on to the benefits of good fortune? He finds most people agreeing that the essence of happiness is in the possession or in the capability with respect to certain goods. But he finds that people are not very sure what these goods are. Some speak of virtue, he says, others of practical or philosophical wisdom. Others would add pleasure or external prosperity to the list. Aristotle does not reject any of these out of hand. All of these are traditional and responsible and worthy of consideration. If the cultivation of virtue is a principal means of achieving good fortune, what happens if a man of this kind, a person of this kind, is constantly assailed by bad luck? This is the debate which was reopened by this notion of moral luck. This is a book of its title by Burdwan Williams. Can we call such a life a good one? On the virtuous but unlucky person who is the possessor, or is the virtuous but unlucky person a possessor of happiness by virtue of being virtuous and in spite of his being unlucky? At some point, Aristotle appears to distinguish between fortune and luck. One is more lasting. There's a long thing here, famous note by this great 19th century scholar Coe, a 20th century scholar, who says that eudokia, there are two terms, eudaimonia and eudokia. Eudaimonia, saubhagyo. Eudokia is something like doibo. See, something happens, a chance. I'm standing in the bus stop, I get the bus. That's chance. I get the bus in one shot, 5 minutes. I get the bus running 5 minutes every day. That's show. Continuity, which is not changed over time. It is not that Aristotle believes the change of circumstance in the normal course altered the conditions of our being. He says that human beings are not chameleons, constantly changing color. In fact, substantial happiness, the excellence of life, is in fact such a condition that preserves us from the sudden attacks of bad luck. But then Aristotle does not think of eudaimonia as a mental condition, but a form of activity. Please excuse my bad throat. As a form of activity or practice. We can only be taught to be happy or unhappy, successful or otherwise, worthy of praise or blame on the basis of the acts that we perform. So this is, there's a long discussion in the third book of the Ethics on the third book of the Nicomachean Ethics on the moral valuation of human actions. I won't go into them. But let us return to the earlier question. Can the person who is without means of sustenance, or is desperately ill, or is friendless, be simultaneously the possessor of the good life? That is the question that we are posing. The example that we have in Aristotle is the example of King Priam of Troy, who loses his 50 sons in battle, could his life be described as a good one? This is the question that I'll be posing in the case of King Lear. Does King Lear have a good life? Or can King Lear's life be thought of? So in what sense, if so? But there are some complications which are still to be. So there is a long passage, I won't read all of it, but this is something where he really lays out the various things, and he says that, look, there's no reason to deny it, that we also require, in order to be happy, we require some external thing. We have to be alive to be happy. So if we starve to death, we can't be happy because we are dead. So we need a modicum of money, and we need other things as well. And among these, the greatest, and there are two whole sections, 2 books as we would say, expended on the idea of love. Love as being the source of happiness. So, I'm not going to dwell anymore on these. So, the passage that I just to read one line. Perhaps a man would be still less likely if he had thoroughly bad children. Mind this. God is, if you like, the strand in the play where there is a pursuit of happiness. Yes, thank you. So this is what Edgar says. What hast thou been? Asks Lear. This is Act 3, Scene 4. A serving man, proud in heart and mind, that curled my hair, wore gloves in my cap, served the lust of my mistress's heart, did the act of darkness with her, swore as many oaths as I spake words, and broke them in the sweet face of heaven. This is a line that was stolen by, filched by T.S. Eliot. Hog in sloth, fox in stealth, wolf in greediness, dog in madness, lion in prey. Okay, so Edgar. Whilst I might escape, so Edgar comes to the heath pretending to be a madman, but of course he is not a madman. He is a dissembler. So you might say that there are these things about that. The more Lear tears his clothes off and runs into the heath and lives this life where he is brought to an understanding of the interface between the human and the non-human. It's a reason why modern interpretations of Lear have been so strongly post-humanist, as it were, saying that the distinction between the human and the non-human world is erased in the middle of the plains. True. But Lear does the same because he uses another kind of dehumanization, that is willful dehumanization, becoming a madman, or simulating a madman, starting, as it were, from nothing, but building back. So if Lear's shedding has one sort of, he comes to that point in the middle of the play where he talks about unaccommodated man. It's a passage that I've omitted, but I'll read it out to you. So Edgar's plan is different. Edgar's pursuit of happiness is of a different kind. It is not like Lear's. So this is something fundamental in Lear. And the play does not support any single view of happiness, any single estimation of happiness, any single estimation of authority. It neither affirms it nor disaffirms it. It is simply unresponsive to it. And we think that it is the figures in the play and it is us, where we see our desires, our hope of reconciliation failing. I think it's Greenblatt who talks about the shock that Shakespeare's first audience must have felt when Cordelia dies. Because that is something which is shocking, which is unthinkable. Okay, so whilst this is Edgar, Act 2, Scene 3. Whilst I may escape, I will preserve myself and am bethought to take the basest and most poorest shape that ever penury and contempt of man brought near to beast. My face I'll grind with filth, and so on. And so it is here, somewhere about halfway in the play, that Lear achieves what you might call, and this is something again that you might have thought that this is what Lear should have achieved at the end of the play. But that's not to be, again. So Lear quickly comes from his willfulness, his whimsicality, to a point where he sees the world for what it really is. Or what he thinks, the way that he should as a king. So the first of these passages which I would like to draw your attention to is the one in Act 2, Scene 4, where he says, our basest beggars are in the poorest thing superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life is sheep as beasts. And as Lear gradually, he is after all an old man, one of the things that you can do, all of you talking about this when coming here, is that if any of you, talking to students, if any of you would like a very strong interpretation of the play which will stay for you for a long time, see Kozintsev's, if you have not done so, film version. It is, in my opinion, the greatest Shakespeare film that I have seen. And more so because I don't understand a single word of what's being said. And the entire play is the play that I have read at one time, and when I go and see it, because I watched it the first time in Gorki Chadan without the print that we had then, was a print without subtitles. Okay. So, as Lear feels that his wits are turning, he's losing his grasp on, because it's also a play which constantly emphasizes physicality, the body. Many decades ago, Carolyn Spurgeon said that the central image in Lear was a body in torment. That was the central overriding image which radiated these many things in the play. So here is Lear, and for the first time, if you think that these three things, one is his understanding of necessity. The man who demanded 100 knights and would not take a reduction is saying that argue not the need. Here we are in a discussion, if in all, which is very close to the Benjaminian discussion of mere life as well as privileged life, and this discussion was taken up in this by the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben in Homo Sacer, between what does mere life mean? What is mere life? Life in itself, without any additions. And this word Lear uses is the word unaccommodated. Unaccommodated man, come to that in a minute. So here is Lear, but this is a passage which I remember a really brilliant exposition of this. It appeared in the Presidency College Journal around about 75, 76, sometime like that, when we were students there, written and by Professor Dashgupta, Arun Kumar Dashgupta, and got out of Professor Dashgupta only through the efforts of Shabanda, Shapan Chakraborty. And it is about the place where Arundava identifies the moment when Lear is able for the first time to put someone in front of him. Someone, he is not thinking of himself, but he is thinking of someone else, the other. A way in which there is a new, as it were, estimation of the world. My wits begin to turn. Come on, my boy, he's talking to the fool. How dost, my boy? Art cold? I am cold myself. Where is this straw, my fellow? The art of our necessities is strange and can make vile things precious. Come, your hovel, poor fool and knave. I have one part in my heart that's sorry yet for thee. And he says, in fool, go first. After this Tempest, this is 3-4. But I'll go in boy, go first. And the fool pulls at him. He says, nay, get thee in, I'll pray and then I'll sleep. It's this where this clasp, where the fool says, come into the hovel. He says that, no, I have something to do. And this is this moment, you might say, perhaps one of the great moments in the play where Lear understands the nature of what it is truly to be a king. And so this is a moment, and we often say this, that Shakespeare shows Lear losing a kingdom to gain a kingdom. It is by losing his kingship that he truly becomes king. But that's very early on in the play. That doesn't stay. It is not, and that's the whole thing, is that even if this is a kind of happiness, it is not long-lasting. Because it is here founded on something else. It is founded on rationality. So this is the kind of happiness which is founded on wisdom. This tempest will not give me leave to ponder on things would hurt me more. And so he says, poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you art, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm. How shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this. That's why I say this is befitting a king's realization of what it is to be a king. When he has lost everything, he gains it, true. But when in the play? That is, I think, a critical point. And almost immediately after this, he meets Edgar in the guise of poor Tom, and something happens within him. And this is where he looks at him and realizes, and has, as it were, another understanding of the human situation. Thou art the thing itself, unaccommodated man is no more, but such a poor bare forked animal as thou art. Unaccommodated man is no more, but such a poor bare forked animal as thou art. Off you lendings. It is here also, a little while later, that we encounter another view where Gloucester has this pessimistic view of the universe. He is clearly somebody who is cursed with an imperfect understanding of things, is quickly moved towards despair, and he looks upon this universe as flies to wanton gods are we to the gods, they kill us for the sport, where the gods are. Is it really that? Or is the universe simply unresponsive to us? Is it a cruel universe, or is it an unresponsive universe? Right? So there is, after this, read this out because it's getting on, and stop in 5-10 minutes. Where there is that long excoriating section where Lear is haunted by these images, particularly of female sexuality, which he represents as the most misogynistic and, if you like, searing images, which he talks often. Suppose he sees those being as relating to his own experience with his. But then you might say that he is again going back to a position where he is extrapolating this entire view of femininity based upon his experience with his own daughters. So it's not that position that we saw him, that where he's talking about the universal condition anymore. But it's as we well know that coming to an end, and sort of read it as quickly as I can, that this reunion with this famous reconciliation scene, the reunion with Cordelia, and of course, even the reconciliation, if you think that reconciliation is again a moment of hope, a moment of possible lucis clarification, that is not to be. Because again, the play is unresponsive to our desire. And soon the Cordelia and Lear are taken captive, and it's Act 5, Scene 1. There's that famous passage, which I just read little bits of it, but that's something. It is a different view of, and here again, I will place another, as it were, interpretation of what might be Lear's vision of the good life. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and sing, and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies, and hear poor rogues talk of court news, and we'll talk with them too. Who loses and who wins, who's in and who's out, and taketh upon us the mystery of things as if we were God's spies. He, a while later, he that parts us shall bring a brand from heaven and fire us hence like foxes. Strong words, but They are separated. They are separated. Cordelia is taken away. Cordelia is killed. Now, it is here that Edgar, and this is the moment which I would like you to, because everything in this play has to do with, if you just rearrange them, you would have a very different play. So if you had all these nice things that Lear says at the end of the play, you would think that, oh, he's passed through all his difficult phases and come to a good phase. But it's not. The play is the timing of these things. And so in the fifth act, beginning of the fifth act, where Edmund is killed in battle in single combat by Edgar. The gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us, almost mirroring and refuting Gloucester's view of an unfair and malevolent universe. The gods are just. But it is what we do that brings us. It is something like the way in which the Greeks think of the universe. And there is some causation. There is some causation at the human level. It is not just things that happen to Antigone because Antigone is cursed by the gods. Something happens, some motion is set in. Anyway, so we've come to this end of this play where I'll leave you with three passages. One is Kent's line, which is, you might say, a line that we often use just to talk about the tragic world and what that world of tragedy is like. All's cheerless, dark, and deadly. The second is where Lear is, the last words of Lear. And my poor fool is hanged, no life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more, never, 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 never. Pray you undo this button. Thank you, sir. Do you see this? Look on her lips, look there, look there. As I think both Orumbabu and Shukandula pointed out, Shukandula and Infirm Glory have pointed out, that Lear is seeing something that we can't see. He is seeing whether he is mistaken or whether he is seeing beyond into a realm of being that is shut off from us. We do not know. So he is, in fact, you might think that looking upon, look there. So it's looking for something and seeing something that we cannot see. And he dies in a moment which was the only way in which Bradley could make meaning to himself this is by thinking that he dies of joy, which is really drawn from the Gloucester death, where Gloucester dies of joy. And so Lear must also, but again, as the play, I mean, if we omit our own desires, we are left with, what does he see? Does he see, is this entirely a kind of, does he die in a delusion? So again, it's that moment of, but it is something which is something that exists at purely a level of words, language. Look there. This is something that we are not able to deny, whether we think or we would like to think that he is misled and this misinterpreting the universe, or whether it is simply something that really never say. And so we come to the last 4 lines of the play given to Edgar in the tragedy of King Lear. The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most, we that are young shall never see so much nor live so long. Again, this is something. There are 2 kinds of intelligence here, you might say. 2 kinds of intelligence. There's a distinction between tragic intelligence and, if you like, comic intelligence, not in the bad sense, but in the sense of the driver of comedy. Comic intelligence is what we call metis intelligence. Metis is a Greek word which is able to see farther than others, and therefore, if necessary, dissimulate, if necessary, conceal oneself, and thus protect oneself and one's loved ones. That is the kind of intelligence that is strongly present, for instance, in Aristophanes' comedy. Metis intelligence. On the other hand, there is, if you like, this point, which I bring it back to love and the notion of love, that Lear's reunion with, I will call this a reunion because he sees it as a reunion. Look there, as he dies, holding his dead daughter. There is some sense in which he himself sees it as. This is where we think of something which is relevant to the general topic of your program. That's the border. So the Greeks use a word which is the word is tolma. Tolma is something which is very strong in tragedy. Tolma is daring to cross a limit. Anger, rage, desire. But the only thing which does not have a limit is love. That is without limit. There is nothing more. And that is, I think, the place where this tragic experience of love is disastrous in the practical sense, but illimitable in, if you like, a metaphysical sense. And I think that is a feeling that Lear leaves me with. And this is for me, even more than Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare's tragedy of love, understanding of love. Thank you very much for being so patient with me.
Thank you. Is this working? Thank you, Omlanda. Brilliantly spoken as always, and no better person perhaps today than Omlanda to speak on Aristotle's Poetics, his Nicomachean Ethics, and of course on early modern theatre and early modern theatre's appropriation of classical thoughts on tragedy in particular, and the ideas that Omlanda expressed on King Lear really set me thinking, because it's a play close to our hearts, and there are certain things that have always intrigued me about King Lear. For example, this is a question that I'd like to put to Omlanda. When exactly does Lear carry out the act of dividing his kingdom? Is it already divided before the play begins? For so the conversation between Kent and Gloucester seems to suggest. If it's already divided, why is he carrying out the love test? Is that a sign of insanity already setting in on the old king? The other thing about King Lear, which again I'd like to ask Amranda about, is one that concerns the scarcity of soliloquies spoken by the protagonist. Lear hardly has a soliloquy, and the speech that Amranda referred to, where he apostrophically addresses the poor naked wretches, which is just about the crux of the play, could be thought of as a soliloquy, a variant of the more conventional soliloquies where we have only the protagonist, or only the speaker on the stage. The food may be somewhere in the corner of the stage, as is Seaton, for example, in Macbeth, when he speaks the tomorrow and tomorrow soliloquy. So that could be thought of as a variant of the soliloquy. But why is it that Lear is not given soliloquies on a larger scale in the play? And of course there will be questions from the audience, but these are 2 or 3 questions that I'd like to put John London. The other concerns the lines that he spoke about, which Lear speaks towards the end of the play, directing attention to Cordelia's lips. There are 2 things that have struck me about those lines Lear speaks. One, he could be thinking of of Cordelia's first reply to him in the play, nothing. Words spoken by Cordelia, her lips being exercised in the process of speaking nothing, and so that might have occurred to Lear now, and things. There's this near plea by Lear that attention should focus on Cordelia's lips, is that even if Lear saw something material, physical, there on Cordelia's lips, which might have been easily pointed out to Kent, Edgar and Albany on the stage, the material conditions of the theatre would always have rendered that invisible to the audience, sitting at a distance.
Absolutely.
So, for the audience, what Lear sees would have remained a mystery, even if the other characters on the stage had been able to see something there. Thank you, Amranda. Thank you.
What's the first question that you asked?
Yes.
Once again.
Yes, when exactly does Lear divide the kingdom?
When exactly?
Yes. Is it already divided before the play begins?
Right. So yeah. Should I take the questions? Let me answer Shubhodhi's questions, and then we can take some more questions. So it is divided in policy. There is an enactment, and this is something which is important, that for Lear, very early on in the play, the enactment of or ritualization of personal, as it were, whims is very important. So he has already decided to give one part to, because as you know, the Kent and Gloucester are talking about it, that the one should have got, or one did get something. Lear is more fond of one than the other, so why did he get so on and so forth. But the 3 parts, as it were, are something in his mind, perhaps marked on a map, the lines along with, I'm just thinking of this as possibly, a nice metaphor of tearing a map. They are all marked, but the tearing must be done. And that is the physical enactment of the ritual. So it's a kind of ritual. That's one. The point about soliloquies is very well taken. Edgar has a soliloquy. The one that Edgar and Nottingham, that one.
No, I spoke about the fact that Lear.
I take your point that others may have in the same play, but Lear's is not Lear's is not an inner. There is very little evocation of an inner, as it were, realm of thought, which is, of course, where the soliloquy exists. That this is something which a character is thinking. It is, as in the question that you ask, you very rightly point out that the audience couldn't have seen much or anything at all. That is why language is so important. So what Lear says is what is all that can be said, or that all that has been said. Something more could have been said, but that is not said. All that we have is that. But the point about soliloquy is I don't know. I don't know. I think that one would have to sit down with the text. I mean, there are short passages, but see, Lear is a play where Lear is never alone. And also, he is never really separated from those following him. And if you've seen Kozintsev's film, till the end of the play, the fool follows him like a shadow. And when he is not speaking, he's playing the flute. Famous music by Shostakovich. At the end, he's sitting there and everything is burning. And civil war has done its worst. And the fool sits on a stone and plays the flute in a kind of pastoral tune, the rebirth of thing. As people go about shifting the rubble of civil war, reordering their lives, and Edgar promising perhaps some livable world. It's that moment where the greatness of Lear is now all we have is this music of a new, as it were, perhaps a new beginning. These are ways, again. See, this was a book called basically the notion that the name will come back to me. I have this great problem now about names. Normative criticism. Normative criticism is that where we want the play to be something. Most criticism, dramatic criticism, is normative, where our reading of the play confirms what we want the play to be. And this is where, this is kind of early deconstructionist argument, not really post-structuralist argument, where you're thinking about play being, as it were, this non-composite all filled with silences, gaps, interruptions, interstices, and not really, and meaning is conveyed as much as by these gaps, as Pierre Marcheret, on the theory of aesthetic production, where he talks about normative criticism from this point of view, that we see wholeness. We need to see wholeness because that is our wholeness, our desire for wholeness, and we want to see it in the play. The plays themselves are incomplete, and Shakespeare, Milton. I see this, for instance, in Samson, another play which is fragmented in this way. Yeah.
Yes, Ocean.
Yes, please. না সবাই বোধহয় শুনতে চাইবে তুমি কি বলো।
Use this mic and
Thank you. It was a fascinating talk actually, and what genuine scholarship is. The thing that I like the most about this talk is the kind of a compassionate reading of the play that you have offered, which is so many times missing in what we do in the name of criticism, which becomes dry, something, scale as well. So, but I was thinking about two or rather three issues I have actually. One is about the way you have talked about Plato's notion of eudaimonia, and if I have got you, correct, then you are talking about that Plato thinks it to be one of the many ways of defining eudaimonia is search for truth, amun, right? So if it is so, then can we say that, and the way you have concluded your talk also, that it is the tragedy of love, right? Lear. So
Yes.
then and the way you have talked about, referred to Bradley also, then can it be said that Lear is ultimately at the point of death is happy because in terms of Plato and in terms of Plato's definition of eudaimonia, that he ultimately finds out truth, his search for truth is complete.
Yes.
So can you argue that?
Okay, I will talk about this. It's a very interesting point.
Yeah.
I would really like to talk about this.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is point number one. Point number two, I have three questions.
Mona.
Point number two is, I was thinking about, Aristotle and the way you have talked about, Aristotle's take on his master's take on eudaimonia and the way he has talked about the tragedy being tragedy among friends and love and friendship, and also the issue of chance and moral luck you have talked about. So I was thinking about, what about, because you have talked basically from the perspective of the pursuit of the happiness that we find in case of an individual. What about the pursuit of the happiness of a community? And is it in a kind of in a conflict with the pursuit of the happiness of an individual? I'm asking you this question because I'm reminded of particularly Augusto Boal, the Brazilian theatre practitioner, and his book The Theatre of the Oppressed, where he has argued that the entire notion of the last point that we see what we want to see actually, that the entire Aristotelian paradigm is a bit oppressive, because it puts a kind of a check on the individual, and individual's happiness is sacrificed because of the happiness of the community. So is it something that on a larger scale will relate to the Shakespearean notion of tragedy as well? I mean, I'm not only talking about Lear, I'm talking about other plays as well, in a generic way. So this is the second important issue that I was thinking about. And of course, the third one is about, the issue of Talma that you have talked about. That the question of overreaching, that only love is beyond this and everything else is. So can it be also a kind of a generic paradigm for tragedy as a whole? Because in most of the cases, the tragic protagonists, they do overreach. And this is something which is related to the second question that I have actually put to you.
Yes, tragic
so these are the
individuals.
three questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for these very testing questions. But let me start with the first one about Plato and eudaimonia. Yes, Plato, I think that in a fundamental way that it may not be the only view of happiness, but central to his view of happiness is the idea that it is the unremitting, unwavering, and unflinching search for the truth. The truth means unchangeability. That is very important. And so for Plato particularly, the truth is single and unchangeable. So anything that changes cannot be true. That is what I think is very important in... now my teacher, Professor Dashgupta, once gave a lecture. Towards the end of his life, there were 3 people in the auditorium, 5 people. There were 3 monks. This is an Ramakrishna mission. There were 3 monks who went away after a while, and there was myself. There was 6, because there was also Shugantada, and there was Siddhartha Dev. It is something I just heard, and naturally sir did not tell any of us, so we found out and we went there. He gave a lecture on the transcendence of tragedy, which, put it simply again, one of the ideas that I picked up was that tragedy is about loss and about grief. There is grief in tragedy. But there is a mode in Western metaphysics which is beyond that, and that is philosophy. In the philosophy, you will find it in Plato's last dialogues, where he looks upon the coming of death as something pleasant, and is unwilling to mourn because he thinks that, and is unwilling to escape death because he thinks that death is irrelevant, because if he has taught correctly, death isn't such a big deal at all. And so it is best for him to rather pray to the god of health that he is being cured of the illness called life. So this is where you have the idea of death stripped of grief. And that is why I said this is transcendence, not not being better, but where the notion of tragedy as having grief is transcended, where you have death without grief. You have death and rejoicing. So I think that you are right. I think that the ending of King Lear would be more an ending which is very strongly a Platonic ending, because as a pursuer of the good life, there is a certain basic incompetence in Lear. He is not able to hold on to all the good things that are necessary for the good life. Neither can he hold on to his own intelligence and his own wisdom or his own mental faculties. But perhaps he is able to hold on to something that allows him a more satisfactory and more profound, as it were, experience of happiness than anything. And bring me to your second question also, the question about the tragedy of love. And this thing about the community and the individual notion of tragedy and thing. Now, the universe is traditionally, you might say that one of the ways in which we were taught Renaissance tragedy when we were students, and I'm sure that this pursued, Nandini will remember this, that it is a providential universe. And acts are performed within a providential universe. So ultimately the universe is sustained by some kind of beneficent power. What happens if we remove this beneficent power is one of the things I think that Lear is doing. Or it is no longer visible. Perhaps it's on a holiday. Perhaps it's gone for an outing. It's no longer there, and things happen in this interval, as it were. On the other hand, you might say you have the universe you are able to have, because Edgar, even in this universe which is unresponsive to our desires with respect to Cordelia and Lear, he is able to find happiness and find prosperity once again. Being, therefore, a comic hero in the most profound sense, a comic hero in a tragic play. And so this is something which I think is the reason why it is so difficult to talk about. But your point about the community and the individual is very, because one of my understandings about things that this entire business about catharsis, tragic catharsis, is grossly misunderstood. Catharsis is not a kind of, emptying of the mind or something like that. You see that it appears to me that the best interpretation of catharsis comes from students of ritual more than anything else, where there were some dances which were performed, and through those dances you entered into when you entered into it, you lost yourself, and through those you sort of entered into these were cathartic in this sense. And so it's not that there is a purification or a purgation or anything like that. It's a way in which the power of these emotions that we visualize or participate in bring us to an understanding. Now, the point about the community that you so raised, that it is a point that, of course, will remain a kind of sticking point in many arguments. In comedy, we know that there is the concern for the community. In tragedy, of course, can we talk about the community? Shakespeare seems very anxious to talk about the community. I mean, in all his tragedies, whether it's Hamlet and Fortinbras, or whether it's Macbeth and Malcolm, or whether it's Lear and Edgar. Somebody comes, or it's Antony and Cleopatra and what's his name, Augustus Caesar. They all come and they sort of it is evidently not the same thing. And the individual agency is value. The point that I was making about Kosinsev is, of course, giving you a very, very communitarian view of the play. Most Western readings are much more, as it were, individual and community and non-community oriented. I think that both kinds of readings are possible. Again, depends who we are and what political situation we are reading it. This is something which, again, just by the way, that I'm sure that many of you know that at one point of time, the play which was acted and reenacted and translated and retranslated in Civil War Ireland was Antigone, a poem about Civil War. And that is, how we appropriate myths for our own purposes. Okay. And this is the last of your questions. And the point about Tolma. Oh yes. Now, the Tolma question comes up in Antigone, because Antigone is also a tragedy of love, and she dies because she says, and this is the famous line that she says, that I am joined to the dead, not in hating but in loving. And then Antigone tells her, then go then to the world of the dead, because there is no place for you here. So this is the point then that Antigone is trying to make, that her love cannot be limited by statute. It cannot be limited by the proclamation, by the edict that tells her to do this, you don't do that. This is that I am joined in by love, and this love has no limit. At the same time, you see that this is, she dies, but in rejecting, in Greek tragedy, you see that the point about Tolma comes where there is this intense struggle between individuals, and at some point, some invisible line is crossed. And that is the moment where violence starts. Benjamin, violence, political critique of violence, there is a line on borders, and crossing borders, and violence. That is the border. এই টলমার কথাটার মধ্যে বর্ডারটা নিহিত আছে. It's not something which is obvious, but it's something which is there, I think. Yeah. Thank you very much for these questions.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Any question?
Nandini has a question. Burnwan has another. But first, Nandini.
Please.
First, I mean, anything that I say will be lesser than, and I'm sort of, it brings back all the memories of college and university life, and the happiness. I don't know whether that's Tolma. The two things that I would like to ask. One is what France says. She herself is down, and that the fact that there is that love is calculated as this much or that much, and it is so near that sonnet 116 that looks upon tempests and is not shaken. So maybe France, who is an outsider to the political battle that is going on in Britain, that is something I'd like you to talk about. Also, whenever I hear unaccommodated, I'm reminded of Naipaul and his book, A House for Mr. Vishwas, because he talks about that unaccommodated man, he will not die a slave. This brings me to Agamben, and who talks about that bare life as the life of a slave. And in fact, Lear makes, there's a strange resonance, because Lear says in front of Reagan that should I kneel and keep base life afoot? So are we talking of, Lear himself, who thinks that that is base, and to keep base life afoot is something that Edgar will also speak about when he comes out of the madhouse of Bethlehem, or Bedlam as it is called. So ultimately for me, what stays in Lear and why I think it's a tragedy of love is because she herself is down.
Yes.
Or whoever is the second thing that I would like you to consider, because we are talking of borders, is the question of generic slippage. The fact that it was first a history, or at least it was so entitled, History and Chronicle, then a tragedy, then a comedy, and the remarkable similarities with Twelfth Night. Look at Oswald and someone like, say, Malvolio, and their relation with the mistress of the house, quasi-sexual, so maybe Lear would very much be like the uncle of Olivia, who is creating riot and who must be governed. So these were my two observations. And otherwise, Amlanda, I'm so glad that you came.
Thank you. And well, Franz Dauer, I could not agree with you more. It is here that Franz recognizes that she is undivided in her love, and that she in herself what she is what she is, and she is whole in what she is. Franz recognizes it even when she denies it, and that is, I think you're absolutely right in saying that it requires Franz, who speaks, as it were, without fear or favor. It is here also, of course, is this whole thing about truth-telling, and again, something which what's the thing in what's the thing in the end? Truth-telling, Foucault. Parrhesia. Truth, speaking the truth, speaking frankly. This is a discussion by one of the last courses of essays, lectures given by Foucault, where he talks about Greek thought and plain speaking, Greek and Latin thought and plain speaking, that when you speak without fear or favor, and which is what happens in Lear, Kent and Cordelia being the plain speakers. But this plain speaking is only valid or meaningful when it is done in danger. That is to standing on the border, standing on the limit, as it were. So that is something which can test the limit. The other is that generic slippage, and my understanding of the whole business about mere life or bare life. See, bare life is the life which can be destroyed but not sacrificed. That is to say, it is the kind of life which is stripped, as it were, of all distinguishing features of what we positively call the human. Now, it is not the same, you might say, as the life of animals, even though the two words that Agamben uses, zoe and bios, zoe is the word which is used for animal life also, and all kinds of life. Actually, bios is also used, it's not used. But anyway, so the point is that it is, in my understanding, Agamben is marking an ideological break which we could see in this play at that moment of what you might call unencumbering. Now, the point about Lear is that the more he unencumbers, he appears to be human. That he discovers or rediscovers his humanity through this process of unencumbering. And this comes back right at the end, something which was just pointed out to me. Prithee, open this button. Again, he wants, at various points, there are these physical acts of unclothing. So I think that all these, whereas Lear's understanding of the bare life is one which is stripped and taken, as it were, apart. There is always the idea of disguise in Edgar. Edgar is also somebody who speaks of being reduced to nothing and standing along with animals. But that is not the same thing. They're two entirely different views. It's to say, this as artifice and this as, if you like, an uncovering, as it were, stripping away, coming back to the question of the Platonic paradigm.
Maybe Ananda, when one assumes
Yes.
a disguise, one also becomes that. So that
Yes.
position is for, at least for in a temporal way,
Yes.
a way of sympathy, a way of oneness, a way of compassion.
Oh, certainly, and becoming that, he becomes that, but it is a shifting. See, what it is. You see that the greatness of Edgar's intelligence is in the way that he adapts to every situation. He's one thing with Gloucester. Several things with Gloucester. His voice changes all through the journey. He is one thing with Lear. He's one thing with the others. When he talks to them, then he's one thing with Edmund. Then he's one thing with Oswald. So all these points in the play, his ability, as you rightly say, ability to assume different identities is part of his mastery and his strength in what he is. Lear's strength comes, as it were, from this process of divestment, stripping away all that is not essential to what he thinks his human essence is. So that is where. Okay, please, actually, the question, please.
Thank you, Amanda, for the wonderful talk. Just a
yes.
small query.
Yes, please.
And we are already running short of time. Amanda, I was thinking about the concept of body in the text.
Yes.
We talked about the importance of body.
I request those at the back to be silent. We are listening to the person who is putting a question and to Amlanda, and we don't want to listen to your murmurs. Please be silent.
So, I was thinking about Lear's expression, particularly if I can correctly recollect, it's in Act 5, Scene 3, where Lear says, who is in, who is
Who's
out.
out, yes.
Yes. And does this mean that Lear himself as a person is confused about the configuration of his own self? What's the other here? Is the other here a human or a non-human or something that is divine? Meaning is Lear in fact as a text where Lear as a person is confused about the configuration of his own self? The self and the other in fact is not clear to Lear himself. How do you look at this?
This is
One
a.
more question.
Oh yes, sure. Sure, please come. Please come. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I have a question. So when we are thinking of this this whole idea of king being the god's representative on earth, therefore the king inhabits a location of proxy. He is the absent present for the unconditioned. And when we look at the play and this whole idea of the centrality of the suffering figure in the play, the body, the king needs a retinue of 100 men to guard his body. And as he loses these exercises in excess, which actually accentuates his dignity as a king. He loses his knight, he disrobes himself. He is also trying to negotiate with this whole idea of the category of the human, where who is in and who is out expands continuously, and he gets closer to this idea of his idea and his pursuit of happiness when he realizes that when they are on this heath and facing the storm, the fool must go in first.
Yes.
And then he must follow.
Yes,
So
yes,
it
yes.
is in this decentering of this entire discourse of
Yes,
exercise
yes.
and dignity that he gains.
Yes. Certainly. Yeah.
That is what I was.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. Yes. So let me start, because these two questions are related in the sense that they draw attention to that, again, impenetrable phrase, who's in, who's out. Right. But the way in which selfhood, you see, that the way I would like to look at it is that how do we regard this passage of selfhood? We learned when we were students, we all did. We had a very salvationist view of this play, didn't we? That we thought of this play as a play about Lear's regaining of wisdom. Somehow, somewhere it must be the case. Why else would Shakespeare write this play? Why else would he make him suffer? Why else is Cordelia there? Now, this is something again very private. I'm want to share the entire thing with you. It's a long and elaborate and ultimately sad thing. But I once asked my teacher, Kitty Datta, who in fact gave me the copy of King Lear that I use, very dear to me, why Cordelia died. It was something that I could not understand. I was a student, and she pointed to Cordelia being a Christ figure. It says that in such a world, goodness must die. It is in the nature of this kind of where redemption can only be gained through sacrifice. Now, what this brings me to is that this is a very powerful thing, and she pointed to the various things, God spies, one thing, and then the place where Cordelia says, I go about my father's business, which is something which Christ says in, I think it's in Matthew. Now, all these things, does that justify or does that prove? My contention is that nothing proves anything. We have our readings of the play. These are readings that we live by. These are readings that we need for our own sanity. These are readings that we need for us to negotiate the world in the way that we know best. Because as Lear says, that way madness lies. If I think too much about it, I too might sort of look too deeply into the abyss and never come back again. So I think that this point about who's in, who's out, of course, technically it appears or lexically to mean who's in favor, who's out of favor. But as always, I mean, the pure lexical meaning is the least interesting in Shakespeare. So it's how how do we think of ourselves in relation to the other? And it is here that there are two of these things. If you trace through that one place where he puts, I'm thinking of the one-to-one things where he puts the fool before him, and the place where he kneels in front of Cordelia, and where he says that we live like birds in a cage. These are ways in which he is thinking of the relationship of the self and the other, of a we, which I think is, in all three cases, this is something which remains a dream. But again, as I said, that this is something that Lear thinks at these points are the ways that he is trying to grasp the reality which he inhabits. Yeah. And this point about the king as being the proxy, as it were, and the king's suffering body, that's older than Christianity. That's takes us back to Fraser and the originary myths of kingship that we were told about when we were starting about to read Greek myth. Just leave you. This is the trick I'm going to teach you now, which is the trick that we use in seminars. I'm going to leave you with a question. And whenever you have a question that you can't answer, you put a question. So this is that consider the fact that in all of Shakespeare's plays, bar one, are about courts. Whether it's tragedies or histories or comedies, they're all about courts. And they all deal with the power relations within elite groups and how those elite groups relate to perhaps to non-elite groups or to other elite groups. So it might be Romeo and Juliet, but there are two elite groups, two families. Or it might be something like Measure for Measure, where there is the elite group and the those who are affected by Angelo's reign of terror. So these are the ways in which now in tragedy, I would suggest you see this image of power. Probably it is true in all Shakespeare's plays, but I can say more certainly of power that it appears in disarray. And because it is in disarray, there is no way of understanding what these estimations of power that the play conceptualizes or verbalizes, whether these have any existence beyond that immediate context. It's to say, this is a point that was made essentially by Greenblatt when he said that there is no assertion of authority in Shakespeare that is either universally disaffirmed or affirmed. So you cannot take something which happens in Hamlet and read it into Macbeth or anything of the kind. So even in the case of kingship, as it were, that there are, as it were, and this is something, this is not, actually this is not Greenblatt, but this is a very interesting East German critic called Robert Wiemann. Robert Wiemann has an article in Shakespeare Quarterly sometime in the 80s called Bifold Authority. You can get hold of it, do read it. Where he points out that there is there is a representational mode in Shakespeare where he represents an ideological world. There is the family, there is marriage, there is kingship, all these. And then all this, which is constantly engaging you with ideological constructs that are current in the societies where this play was acted, or they may, where they relive. So we might go into the world of the Bombay underground if you think of Makbul. So in one way, whatever way, but other is that the fact that these are, after all, enacted in something which is a form of mimicry, which is very close to other forms of entertainment. So at one level it is serious, on the other level it is constantly entering into this world of the make-believe. And that is one of the reasons for the instability of this world. And so this whole business about the proxy, I think, and the king as the proxy of God is also something which itself cannot be sustained. So if that is ideological, something which you will find, say, in King James's writings, the king as the A of God, it is not something that the play, because the play is enacted in the playhouse, which is a site of illicit pleasure. If you look here at Mullany well, you will see that it is a space which is a heterogeneous and a heterodox space, and a heteronomous space. Thank you.
Thank you, Amranda. I'm afraid we have to bring this very lively session to a close because it's close to 3 in the afternoon now. And
Abar Juliet, yeah? Abar Juliet.
Thank you, Amranda, for treating us to this extraordinary extent of discussions. And I, on behalf of the department, thank Amranda for the time that he's taken
Thank you very much.
speak to us. And will there be a formal vote of thanks from the Yes. Sanjay, my colleague in the department, will deliver.
I mean, one happiness is awaiting us in the guest house, and that is those people are getting a little
Itchy.
Very quickly, Sanjay will deliver the vote of thanks.
On behalf of the Department of English and Culture Studies, I'd like to thank the university authorities for giving us this wonderful lecture hall. And I'd like to thank the University Grant Commission for providing us with all kinds of financial support. Without which we have been really organizing this lecture. I'd like to thank Professor Omran Dasgupta of Jadavpur University, a towering figure in academia. I'd like to thank him for enriching us with his scholarly thoughts on Shakespeare and tragedy, particularly King Lear. I'd like to thank the friends of Professor Dasgupta for coming over here and for being part of this intellectual discussion. I'd like to thank the participants for making the session quite interactive. And I'd like to thank the audience for giving a pleasant hearing. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for making this lecture a grand success. Thank you.
Will you take one picture of us? Yes, on the stage actuation.